I wasn't sure if you meant like all your life's problems or your
Oh no,
computer
my
problems.
computer
Because
problems.
was this a big announcement? Like you figured it all out?
No, never.
Because tell me your secret.
No kidding.
It's awesome. All right, we're live on Instagram too.
Great. Well, I'll just hit record and we'll go.
Sounds good.
Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy. Today we open on a somber note. Most of you know what happened today, but as we record on Thursday, May 16th, we're going to be talking today about Eduard Lowen announcing the tragic cause of his extended absence from training. This is in addition to his hamstring injury that he suffered way back in March. It was an interesting presser today, and Matt was there. Matt Bigger's here with me, but he was also at the presser today and getting a lot of vibes about how crazy that announcement was and the vibes about the room itself. And Matt, I know you have a lot of details to kind of share with us about the story.
Yeah, Phil, definitely an unusual week. Not just the midweek match, but we heard from last week that Bradley Carnell said Eduard Lowen would be available to speak to us this week, and he talked to us on Thursday. He was the player that was available during the press conference, and it was down to business as quick as possible. There was one topic on everyone's mind, and that was, Edu, what do you want to talk about? And he said that he wanted to be as transparent as possible. Edu opened up to us that his wife had some serious health issues, and it has gotten progressively worse and worse. She ended up having a surgery, and he revealed to the media today that his wife has brain cancer. And he didn't go deeper than that on the specific medical diagnosis or anything. It was how he's been handling it and how she's been handling it. He did say that she's doing very well right now. And so in the journey that they are on, it is, at least for right now, a positive moment. Edu said a request to everyone. He said, quote, to his brothers and sisters in Christ, he asks for prayers and courage in this time. Edu went on to thank the club and owners. He said that nobody was rushing him. We heard the Eduard Lowen version of what Carnell had been saying. He referenced Lutz Pfannenstiel, his teammates. He called out Bradley Carnell and Tyler Harris, the athletic trainer in particular, for all having supported him immensely. They told him he could take as much time as possible, and their actions aligned with what they said. He was very appreciative of that. He noted that his wife was also happy to see him playing again. I think it's one of those. He referenced a couple times that it seemed like his wife understood that this seemed a little harder on Edu. It's one of those things, right? Like the person going through it handles it one way, and the person who's supporting and loving that person handles it another way. And this has obviously been tough on the family. Lowen said that there was a lot of crying, weeping, and sobbing. He talked about his faith a lot in how his pastor and his church have helped him through things, how grateful he is for the love of all the people who have supported him, from the community to the club to those just in the city and on the support. And he spoke about the gratitude and how he feels that he's grateful that he can talk about this, because he referenced specifically that it didn't used to be this way. And he said, quote, I appreciate this setting a lot because I know I can talk very openly about it. Where I come from, it's not very easy to talk about stuff like that very openly. It gets seen as a weakness, not being real. And he had a lot of positive things to say about St. Louis, not just the club, but the city, the holistic aspect, the support, the time, the love that's been shown by the fans whenever they're seen out in public, the appreciation, the recognition. Him and his wife, they love that kind of thing. They feel at home here. And I couldn't help but remember back to when he first arrived back in 2022 and the journey that he has been, that we've seen. Obviously, a player's personal life is a player's personal life. But from the glimpses that we've seen, the things that we've heard, the absolute honor he feels to play for St. Louis and live in St. Louis. And this family, this man just got his green card to live here. He's under contract for St. Louis City until 2026. So he was under like a 4.5-year contract when he came here. This is a long-term plan for Eduard Lowen, and St. Louis is his home, and we're the people who now need to lift him up and support him. And it was the saddest possible press conference room that I've ever been in. I was uncomfortable only in the sense that I was holding back tears. And I'm grateful to the other media personnel that were in that room for asking the questions that was on my mind, but I did not trust myself enough to get through my voice cracking or breaking down to ask them. And I think there was care in how this was handled with Edu Leuven. There was sensitivity shown by everybody involved, and I don't know what else to say because I just feel so much for him, and I'm grateful that St. Louis is his home because I know our fans will lift him up. But it's just such an awful, awful thing for his wife and for him to be going through.
Yeah, I think a lot about when Leuven had his City Voice interview and how moving to the United States, a big part of that was his faith. And I think you can empathize, whether you're a Christian or not, you can empathize with having your people, right, and having a support system. And I think my favorite thing about this whole situation is, if there is to be a favorite thing, it is that it's just like obvious support from the club. I mean, I know you said it, but I'll reiterate that, it's just clear that soccer was not first on everyone's mind here. It was making sure that Leuven and his family were taken care of and doing what they needed for themselves. And that's where they should be. That's where I want my club to be. It doesn't matter if he's the best player on the team or the worst player on the team or whatever, highest paid, lowest paid. I'm glad that this went down the way it did. I think when we had no idea what was happening, that quote early on is the one that kind of stuck with me through this, when my mind started wondering, like, was this what's going to happen? I just remember Carnell saying, we've given him a lot of space. He needs to deal with some things away from the field right now. And that's where we'd like to leave that discussion. It's just like, clearly they're protecting him from the media, which is what they should do. They gave him as much space as he wanted. I'm just really, I'm really happy with the way the club handled it as a fan of the club. And I just want to, I guess, kind of also say, this is really all I have to say about it as well, is that as fans, I just feel like we should emulate that support in the best way we possibly can. Pushing away rumors and like any bad talk. And perhaps this is even a good time to set aside any differences we might have between each other or with Leuven himself. And so I just want to encourage everybody to do that. That's kind of all I had to say, Matt. But I'm really glad you were there, because I think from the outside we weren't really gathering, the emotions in the room and like how seriously everyone was taking it and how much it hit not just Leuven himself, but the coach, the team, even the news staff.
Yeah, I got to give credit to Tom Timmerman for the way he handled some of those questions, prefacing them with, I don't know how far you want to go with some of these things, being very sensitive to, this is the player's choice on how much he shares. We're not beholden to any information. We don't deserve to know. We're fans of a sports club. And if the player has personal things going on that's preventing him from doing something, that's at the player's discretion. It's not the scenario of the players holding out on a contract or refusing to play because they want a trade or a transfer. This is as far from that as possible. Leuven, unfortunately, is dealing with an injury at the same time. And so that quad injury that came, or the hamstring injury, I'm sorry, hamstring injury that came after the Austin FC game just happened to have the timing that coincided with this. And so his recovery was deprioritized. Obviously, he's a person. And that's tough for some fans to accept, and you want your team to perform as well as possible. And we know the impact that Edu Leuven has on this club, not just with his passion, but with his talent in all aspects, all phases of play. And it's difficult when you see your club not winning every single game and your star players out and you're frustrated. And I know there have been things that fans have thought of just wanting him back, and whether they desperately want an answer or they don't care. I think this is kind of like a flashpoint for me. This is a moment to take stock and not just like reevaluate how you approach players and moments and things that might be going on with them on or off the field. But I think this is just a good opportunity to reflect. It's definitely a good opportunity to hug your loved ones and appreciate what you have. I think that it probably goes without saying, but I gave my wife an extra hug and a kiss this evening just because there was the magnitude of it was just that big. And this isn't something that is soccer related, though that's how we have our into Edu Leuven and welcome him into our community. But I don't care, honestly, at this point right now, as we record this, if Edu Leuven plays 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes on Saturday. I just want Edu Leuven to do what's best for Edu Leuven and his family.
And you didn't quite say this, but I do think it's a complete. I'm with you on everything you said there, but it was also just occurring to me as you were talking about, this is a moment, this is a statement. It shows it shows what the club is, right?
Mhm.
It shows what they're gonna do. You show your true colors when something difficult pops up, and so in a way, this is the club shining and showing what it truly is. So I was really, again, I'm just really happy that they handled it the way they did. Of
No
course,
regrets on how they
yeah,
handled it. Absolutely.
absolutely. Of course, we wish him the best. And you made a great statement today on the flyover account. I wasn't sure what to say, so I'm glad you handled that. Um, but
You toe the line sometimes between letting people know that you're doing a podcast and wanting people to tune in, but also going back to what I said at the beginning, like this is a sensitive time. Like there's no easy transition from talking about this to talking about soccer. There's no easy way to say, "Hey, we're Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. Can you please tune into us?" Because we have this tragic news to talk about. Like it doesn't exist the perfect transition. It doesn't exist to make those things make sense to each other. And so everybody just does the best that they can. I hope that any words that I say either on this pod or that you say on this pod or that we put out as social media is uh, has the grace that the situation deserves.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I did think of a decent transition, and it was brought to us by Justin Horniker, because, I mean, this is insane. He tweeted today that Edu Leuven's 3 big chances created
Mhm.
this season still sees him tied atop the City SC leaderboard, and he's only played 262 minutes. So he's
Yeah,
been gone. He hasn't
nothing.
gotten many minutes, but he's still at the top of that leaderboard. And I think we can all easily agree that we will be very, very, very happy to see him return. And of course, it feels so good to, it's almost like we have his wife's blessing as well as he does to be happy for him to come back. It's like, because you don't want it to be for the wrong reason. And I absolutely love and support that she wants him to come back as well. That's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want to use that as our transition to LAFC and looking at the recap?
Yeah, because it will be really nice to have him back, and we might even look back on this game as kind of, well, this was that phase that we didn't really have Edu Leuven, that maybe our chance creation was suffering, or we found a way to do it without Leuven to some extent. And there are a lot of storylines we could talk about here, but we also can say a few things about LAFC as well.
Yeah, this LAFC game saw a strong St. Louis starting lineup, and we ran out the same exact lineup we had been running out, except for Joachim Nilsson saw his first start. And at the end of the game, Bradley Carnell was specific, saying this was a prescribed 45 for Joachim Nilsson. So at the end of the game, some of the takeaways were the sub timings that Bradley Carnell made, the center back sub at halftime, the line change at 63, taking out Klaus Salio Nostrak at a point where we had just allowed a goal. All of these, I think, play into the fixture congestion, the need to get players fresh legs or keep them healthy for what we're going to have against FC Cincinnati. It's as much managing the game as it is managing the circumstances. And one of my biggest takeaways from this overall is just we continue to have good creation to get the ball into the final third, but we continue to have poor quality of our shots. And I think one of the biggest things that you see that you miss from Edu Leuven continues to be our set piece taking. There's just not as much bite on any of our set pieces that we take when it's anybody but Leuven. I mean, we're trading anyone from Indiana Vasilev to AZ, Salio, and it's just not as effective. I mean, these are all tremendous players in their own right, but again, it's not at that level of Leuven. And so that's one thing you obviously look to improve upon. And that's not even speaking to the PK situation that happened at the 16-minute mark where Klaus kind of danced around the ball and then tried to hit it bottom left corner, and Lloris saved it with ease relatively. That was frustrating because if you look at the stats, not just as a PK about an 80% make on XG, but it had a 0.99 expected goals on target,
Oh
meaning
gosh.
the spot that he chose was a good spot. It was just not a quality hit. And
Hmm.
that's a microcosm of everything else. We were putting the ball into spots, but we just didn't have good finishing touches to them.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to have you talk about some of the stats because at the first half, I saw how many shots on goal there were, and I was like, "Oh," I think I said on Twitter to your comment that it did feel a lot like Chicago, where St. Louis was kind of controlling the game, but then every single counterattack was scary as heck. And so, um, that's one story. I would say the other story is you listing these XG numbers here.
Yeah, it was frustrating to count them up on FOTMob because in the first half we did have 0 shots with greater than zero point 0.1 xG. And what
Mm,
I've been trying to do here is I've been trying to use like baseline numbers that we can track for the quality of our shots because we have the volume. The volume's there in droves and it was there again in droves last night, but the quality is where the biggest problem lies. On total shots, we still had 14 to 12 total shots, 7 on 3 shots on goal. So the quantity is there. First half, 0 shots with greater than zero point 0.1 xG. Only 1 shot with greater than 0.3 expected goals on target, which is taking the xG, taking the spot on the field in which you're taking the shot and the circumstances, and adding to it the spot that the ball lands on the net. So top corner, bottom right, left, right, or in the mid. And it has percentages that give you more credit as saying you're expected to score a goal if you're going top shelf, top right versus right in the middle of the goal. Only Anthony Marcanic was anywhere near zero point 0.3 in the first half expected goals on target. And that's almost unacceptable with how well we were getting the ball into the final third in and around the box. The second half wasn't any better. We had 0 shots still with greater than zero point 0.1 xG and only 2 shots on target, both Tomas Ostrak at 61 and Nukvi Thorson at 90 plus 9. The expected goals on target were terrible on those two. It was 0.01 for Ostraks outside the box, and it was 0.06 for Nukvi Thorson, who shot almost right on target on Lloris. So the quality again of our shots when the opportunity might be there to take something is abhorrent. Phil, I think you're muted. I will go with another stat that I was looking at, which is the amount of or the defensive action line. That's another fun one that I like to look at that we'll talk on FC Cincinnati. But this LAFC team was sitting back on us. This LAFC team was there. You go.
oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Have fun editing this one.
Yeah, I'll edit that for sure. Well, I just wanted to say after that, after what you just listed about those stats, that that's a continuation. That's been happening pretty much all season, right? And so,
Yeah.
especially minus Lowen. So that's interesting. Something to keep an eye on. Maybe that'll change with Lowen. Maybe there will be adjustments. I think I wanted to ask you just one last thing. I think what everyone was talking about this game was, of course, the handball to Marcanic. Of course, the second yellow. On one hand, I loved what everyone said in the presser. I think they said all the right things. All the players said all the right things after the game. And that, the ref went their way early and then the ref didn't go their way later and they didn't overreact about it. Clearly fans were angry. I was shouting during the game and I tried to adopt the players' mentality after, but that second yellow was the one that really upset me. The handball thing has been problematic all across the entire world. So I don't know if that's something to belabor. It is a thing or it isn't a thing on a daily basis. But that second yellow to me was pretty horrendous. And then a lot of calling got really bad for the rest of the game.
Oh, it was bad after that. But the handball in the box, I mean, the thing to be frustrated with is how the rules are written, because I think as a lot of people online have said, by the letter of the law, that was a handball. But in practicality, Marcanic's hand was tucked to his body. The ball just rolled off it like it would have rolled off his body. I mean,
Yeah.
that's difficult to accept because it follows the letter of the law, and we just don't like how the law is written. But the second yellow card, I mean, as soon as I saw it, I posted something on social media right afterwards because I went back on the Apple broadcast because I was sitting in the press box for this one, and I rewatched it really quickly, and I was just so stunned, not just because it was a red card, but just that a card was given at all. And the more that I've thought about this one, so what, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the play and probably seen the replay of this where Marcanic receives a pass from Tim Parker on a switch essentially from the opposite side of the field. And it kind of goes off Marcanic's chest and he gets challenged on it after he tries to recover it. and he goes down, and in the process of going down, his arm flings back behind his body in what seems like a natural motion if you're getting pushed. There might be a slight bit of his arm just flew out, but his arm comes into contact with the LAFC player, and Marcanic is the one who's carded on that. I don't know how you give Marcanic the card in the first place when he was the one who was fouled initially. And Bradley Carnell even said that after the game. He said, I'm not sure. This was knee-jerk reaction in the moment. Bradley Carnell said, I wasn't sure because it looked like we were fouled. I don't know how they gave us the card. And Marcanic even said the same thing. He was available at the presser too, saying at post-game, yeah, I thought I was fouled, and apparently they thought my arm came up and hit him on my way down. And that's the thing. His arm came up and hit the player. The other frustrating thing is, okay, if you say this is a yellow card, that's in and of itself, whatever, it's a yellow card. How in the world are you going to give this as a second yellow card? Because we know that there's leeway given when it comes to a second yellow card. The two cards are not always given the exact same in subjective nature of the officiating. They oftentimes will say, this is a warning, your final warning, right, of second yellow. We're not going to show you the exit on this foul, but if you do something like this again. And I don't recall ever seeing Marcanic get that kind of a warning in that circumstance. So it's just frustrating all around there.
I'll take you one step further and take this with a grain of salt. I'm the worst person to comment on refereeing, and I know that, so I try not to say too much. But I've yet to ever see an accidental hand to the face given a yellow ever in my life. Right. It just doesn't happen, especially if there's nothing in it. Like if he swung his hand wildly on purpose and hit him, that's one thing. But I didn't see that personally. I thought it happened way too fast to even consider that was a possibility, that it was on purpose. So I think that one was pretty clear and obvious that it was just like a bad call, a weird call. And I hate how much it affected the game. You know, weird calls throughout the game, weird calls all the time in every game. I don't know if any call has affected a game more than that one this season, at least.
Yeah, right before that happened, we actually had some decent momentum similar to the first half. I mean, we didn't have a lot of bite to it, but we were progressing the ball fairly well. We were getting it where it needed to go, chasing that equalizer. And I asked Tim Parker after the game, but between the point of the goal, through the line changes, to the red card, how did you feel the team was performing? Because that's our example, right, of them being able to try to come back. It's the 15, 16 minutes between the goal and the red card. How did they felt they played? And Parker said they thought they played good. They were aggressive. They wanted it. They were playing hungry. They were trying to get the ball up into Sam, and they were having the same problems that they were having in the first half of getting the ball into the penalty box for good quality chances. But then after the Marcanic red card, everything just kind of fell apart. You were seeing a lot more falling back by LAFC. They knew that they had the advantage. They were much more willing to engage in a low block versus a mid block. And this is what ended up leading to eventually in stoppage time, the Denny Bawanga goal, where he just poached a pass and ended up going for goal and chipping Berkey, because LAFC was holding back so far and St. Louis was just keeping such a high line, sending up every single player, trying to make it even as much as possible. And they did actually have a chance there. Ilie Sanchez had to go off for a couple minutes in the new MLS rule that was applied. He was hilariously frustrated.
Loved it.
It would be even more funny if we had at least a point out of this. But we did play 10v10 for a short period of time, and unfortunately we weren't able to capitalize on that.
Man, it didn't feel like we were getting as rabid as I wanted them to be in that moment. I was like, we're even. This is our only chance, really. It is what it is. I would just say this is one to forget, folks. I don't know if we face LA. I assume we face LA again this year. So
we'll play them with Olivier Giroud later this year.
Good point. But one to keep in the back of your mind, maybe the next one will be more like the real matchup. So I think that's enough on that one. And I do think I'll take this opportunity to finally say, for real, you're listening to Flyover Footy on the big 550 KTRS. We are presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we move on from sad news to a different kind of sad news in LAFC in the loss to hopefully better pastures here against FC Cincinnati.
Yeah, the reason I wanted the LAFC win or a draw so bad was because FC Cincinnati, I wanted it to be kind of a freebie. I really wanted FC Cincinnati to be that team you could just
Mhm.
go play free against, and you didn't have to chase points. You could feel good about going into this on 19 points and where you were. As it stands, St. Louis is still ninth in the West, now with a 3-2-7 record after playing 12 games, 16 points plus one goal differential. We have yet to find an away win. 0-1-4 away. That's one loss and four draws. In the last three MLS matches, it's been up and down. Listen to this compared to what we're going to say about Cincinnati. Up and down, drawing Houston away, nothing, defeating Chicago 3-1 at home, and then, of course, just losing to LAFC 2-0. Now, St. Louis, when you talk about form, we haven't strung together a streak of anything really, just draws. We've had multiple draws in a row. We haven't had multiple wins. We haven't had multiple losses. So we're trying to avoid that now. The first losing streak of the year against FC Cincinnati, knock on wood. That's kind of what's at stake, is that piece of the season. They also have not had two or more in a row without scoring a goal. So we've been good about bouncing back after a tough loss or a goalless match. After our last loss against RSL 3-1, they drew FC Dallas at home 0-0. So they still salvaged a point. And that's what we have to kind of look forward to against FC Cincinnati. I think every single St. Louis fan is going into this thinking I would be happy with a point. You're not going to have many matches throughout this season. June 2nd might be another one, but you're happy. I think you're happy with a point. And that's kind of driving the narrative of this, because FC Cincinnati right now, we know there's the Supporter Shield winners from last year, but they're second in the East and they are hot on the heels of Inter Miami. They have an 8-2-3 record in 13 games. They've played one more than City, but they have 27 points compared to St. Louis's 16. FC Cincinnati has a +6 goal differential and are 3-1-2 at home this year. Their form in the last three: wins. Nothing but wins. Their last three were 1-0 Orlando at Orlando, 2-1 at Columbus in Hell is Real, their first win at Columbus, and then a 1-0 win at Atlanta. But they've won their last five matches, Phil. This is a team that they had a stretch of two losses to start April against the New York Red Bulls and CF Montreal, but those are their only two losses of the year, both 2-1, and they've scored at least one goal in every match since March 17th, just their fourth match of the year. They've had 5 clean sheets throughout. St. Louis has had 4, but this is a team that is scorching hot with their 5 wins in a row, and they're looking for another one to try and catch up to Inter Miami.
Yeah, and just to bring in some of the points Santiago made in our DMs, and I apologize if you guys have heard this in other episodes, but I love bringing up the fact that we almost, with a win at home on Saturday night, it would have been very close to our points at this point in the season last year, correct? Is it like 1 point away, 16
pretty
versus
close.
17 or something like that?
Yeah,
So
at this point of last year, we were kind of plateauing, and so we're about where we were, but it started another run here in the next couple of games, so we're hot on the heels of chasing ourselves.
yeah, and I mean, that's something to keep in mind in one way. In another way, I do think we're purposefully trying to pace ourselves this year, right? Like
sure.
every game, as Blom said last year, I think it was, every game felt like a final last year. And so I don't think that's happening this year. And I think that's intentional. I think that whole peak at the right time has been big for me this year. But also Santiago, it would have been nice to get a win because it is a little less pressure when you're playing someone from the Eastern Conference. It's not like a 6-point game sort of thing. So there's that as well. But, with the loss, I think you got to take this very seriously. Not that they wouldn't, but I do think it is good, to keep the good and the bad in mind here.
And last year, if you look at 3 matches in 8 days, Carnell did this kind of thing where he rode the hot lineup until it wasn't hot anymore. And I think that's where we are. So as we sneak peek ahead to what our starting 11s might look like against FC Cincinnati, I think this is going to be the biggest crapshoot of all
Yeah.
in a while. Like, we've all kind of coalesced around our ideal 11, at least at this point in time. And it's all going to be blown up a little bit, where we're going to see rotation, we're going to see differences, but that might not be bad. You might a fresh jolt of energy, a new fresh legs on the field, guys with something to prove who are hungry from St. Louis's side, like the lineup change that ended up coming in, where you're having Sam Adeniran, AZ Jackson, and Jabula Blom, a little bit reminiscent of the Sam Adeniran led lineup that played the San Jose Earthquakes last year, where you had Sam, AZ, Akil Watch, and Josh Yarrow make their first starts together. And they won away 2-1 against San Jose. Now, San Jose is not the same caliber as FC Cincinnati. Fully understand that.
That's
but
a tough, yeah.
It's a tall ask what we're getting ready to do against FC Cincinnati, because as we're about to get into, they are a massively talented team led by a massively talented player. St. Louis is going to have to play and I hate to use these kind of euphemisms, but blue collar, hard nosed soccer if they want to pull out a point against FC Cincinnati.
Just don't say tale of two halves. Okay. That's all I ask. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think if we're going to talk about players really quickly, I really wanted to make sure we talked about the Doer comments about perhaps in the pressers that, you guys are getting vibes that perhaps Doer isn't the 1-for-1 for Marcanic as a starter at this point in the season, at least. I thought that was interesting and surprising.
Yeah, Bradley Carnell actually addressed Nicholas Dewar in the press conference. He said, "We would have liked to get Nicholas on the field a little more. It has been slow, but we're just trying to push him along, encourage him." Carnell was referencing acclimation to the country and culture and referred to how Ostrak had that opportunity coming in early with City 2 and how he is now. Not that Ostrak chose or was forced to play with City 2, but if you remember, that was 2022. It was similar in the other players. He just called out Ostrak because Ostrak has been playing lights out so far this year. And to see that acclimation period, which is, he used Ostrak not just because of the early coming in and how he's playing now, but last year I think a lot of people were frustrated by Ostrak and how he couldn't really crack the starting 11 regularly. He was frustrating at times, couldn't find a spot, whether it was central midfield as an attacking role or on the wings. But this year he's really come into his own. And Carnell seemed to allude to Nicholas Dewar in that kind of mindset where maybe there's a little slower and everybody acclimates to a new country, new culture, just new way of life. And in addition to being asked of what the team's doing. And he came in pretty late. So it seems like it's one of those scenarios. He didn't really indicate that it had anything to do with talent. And I think that's the biggest thing. I remember comments back in 2023 about a different player on St. Louis City's roster who Carnell, when asked why he wasn't playing, definitely did not say anything about the culture or acclimation. It was doing what he was asked. It was the ability to produce on the field type statements. And that player is not with St. Louis City right now, though he plays the same position. I don't look for Nicholas Dewar to be in that conversation. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time, and Dewar's under contract for a while. So this is a long-term project. And right now, it wouldn't surprise me after these comments if Kyle Hebert ended up starting at left back or something like that. I think it would shock a lot of people if you had that in your mind. And a lot of people would immediately jump to conclusions of, oh, is Dewar a failed project already? But I didn't get that. I didn't get that sense from Carnell. I got the sense that this is intentional. They're being careful in monitoring him and bringing him along. Not unlike Edu Leuven, honestly, in the same mindset of the club knows there are personal and professional things that have to be handled when a player joins a new league like this. And we don't know 90% of what's going on. And so it's still trusting in the system to bring players along. It's still trusting in the coaching staff to coach up the players who were brought in to do certain jobs. And when you're having a player like Anthony Marcanic perform like he is and seeing the growth that he's had over the year, I think of the growth that he's had since the LA Galaxy game in particular as remarkable. And knowing that we have him is a little less, it's a little less urgent to get Nicholas Dewar 90 minutes every single game.
Well, and notice, yes, he's improved a lot. I think that's a great point, but also he did hit the ground running. I mean, he was able to play quite a bit last year at left back after, we had a couple failures at that position in who we were putting out there, or at least that the coaching staff wasn't happy with. And I think he came straight from MLS, right? A lot of MLS experience. He was used to the country, used to the travel and all that kind of stuff, the weather for that matter. And so that is a major player in this game, and Dewar just hasn't acclimated yet. I think that's just the answer. And it's so normal for foreigners coming over to St. Louis. I even think about how a lot of us were saying, why is Thorson not even making the 18 at the end of last year? And I think it's the same exact kind of thing. You were kind of hinting at exactly that. So I'm with you on that. The only confusing part is, those salary numbers came out, and I already knew that his purchase price was very similar to Totland, and look at how great Totland has been. And so that's hard to see how much they spent on him. The salary is really similar to Totland, and it's just two totally different, situations there. And, I try to remind myself that we bought Dewar and Totland in a time when left backs and right backs were just costing more than if it comes in the summer window. It's just part of the game. So numbers don't always equal out.
midseason transfers for European leagues, that you're not going to get guys at a cheap cost, and they were rumored to be 500,000 in the transfer fee. Dewar's on a salary of around 300,000. But if you're going to get upset about not having a $300,000 salaried player play every single game, then you did not want to be a St. Louis City fan in 2023 when Tomas
Yeah.
Ostrak was making $800,000 and doing what he was doing last year. That's why I liken
Fair.
it to Ostrak.
Yeah.
Like that, you're seeing this growth, and now people are seeing Ostrak and saying this guy's amazing. Central midfield position is his. I don't know if he can leave that role once Lowen comes back. How are we going to keep him in the lineup? So it's so fluid of a conversation when it comes to the value of a player with his either transfer fee or salary. And this is way too early to be jumping to conclusions to me for Nicholas Dewar.
And I think Lutz has had a timeline in mind the whole time, and I don't think he's been straying from it. And I do think he's been proven right for the most part. I mean, you miss on players. That happens in every team, but the timeline itself, I think it's a good point. Matt, we're running a bit out of time. We have maybe 5 minutes or so. If you'd like to cover something before we do our lineup, please have your pick.
Should have taken a drink of water before this one. All right, we know St. Louis is probably going to have a rotated game. Edu Lowen should return. We're still missing Josh Yarrow with his hamstring. Anthony Marcanic is suspended for this match, so St. Louis, we're going to see a likely rotated lineup. But FC Cincinnati has one key player to focus on. They've got a talented roster up and down, but their one key player, everybody knows his name. It's Lucho Acosta. He is a reigning and defending MLS MVP. He had 17 goals, 10 assists last year, including 97 key passes. He's their designated player, Argentinian attacking midfielder. He makes $4.2 million a year for what it's worth. And in this season, he's on pace to do just that and more. He already has 6 goals, 6 assists, 43 key passes. This player is who their offense flows through. They've got a style that is a little more intentional than St. Louis. I don't think I would look to necessarily the high press at all for them, but where St. Louis has a style of play that we know and somewhat love, the lowest sequence time in MLS, the fewest passes per sequence, the quickest direct speed in MLS. Obviously, they use their aerial and direct threat to try and progress the ball up, in addition to using their wings, getting the ball into the final third in their wings. FC Cincinnati has the talent and patience to build before they strike in their press, in their initial defensive action. Their bottom half in the direct speed breaks their willingness to play the ball into their midfielders before finding their runs and then switching the ball up when they need to. There's a lot of intentional movement that FC Cincinnati is going to have with the ball. In their pressing, FC Cincinnati likes to press in a mid block, so their engagements are going to come either between the half line and their defensive 18-yard box. That's where I would expect St. Louis to run into a lot of pressure and spaces being closed up. FC Cincinnati likes to possess the ball a little bit more, progress the ball down through their left side. If you look at their heat maps, definitely the left side as we get into the attacking third. Under third-year coach Pat Noonan, FC Cincinnati plays with 3 in the back, usually runs a 3-4-1-2 with Lucho Acosta as that central attacking midfielder. The midfield duo that they have, the central midfield core, will help with ball possession from their back 3. They're not afraid to roam on the field, so they will move out of position to try and find space, but they're very intentional about doing what they need to find space before they progress the ball. Once they do find that space, it's Lucho City. Lucho Acosta is a free roamer. He can come back to the ball just as he can receive it in transition to move up. And he looks to his 2 strikers as threatening run-ins behind the back line to stretch opponents. This is a huge problem that's going to be a key for St. Louis, is the back line stretching that Lucho Acosta will facilitate with his ball handling and ball movement. FC Cincinnati is a team that will love transition, capable of possessing. They like to switch the ball. They're 5th in the league in switches, but they also like to carry the ball into the attacking third. They're 3rd in the league in carries into the attacking third, mostly crediting Lucho Acosta. But again, when they do go into the attacking third, they look wide, mostly to the left, as usually about 50% or greater of their movements into the attacking third start on their left side. So look for Thomas Totland and either Blom or Durkin to be fading over and needing help on that right side of Cities as Cincy progresses on their left. Cincy will not engage in St. Louis's defensive third, so St. Louis will be able to move the ball out of their half, not at ease, but a little easier than against a pressing team like maybe the Chicago Fire in their heyday. Defensively, FC Cincinnati will drop their wing backs into create a back 5. This is another problem for St. Louis. St. Louis is going to be challenged on their wings with a wide back line of FC Cincinnati. Their midfielders are going to shore up around the top or the outside of the box, and defensively, they're going to look like a 5-2-3.
Something else I noticed too is I looked at a stat that I retweeted from someone that Durkin is one of the best statistical leaders in turnovers in the opponent's half.
Yep.
And Yuya Kubo is also on that list. So that's something to watch for. He's been playing a lot of different positions for them, I think, this year, but another one to watch. They do press high.
Well, he also is their second leading goal scorer.
Yeah, that's what made me think of it.
Yeah.
Which I didn't expect. He's getting up there, and I think a lot of Cincy fans were kind of down on him after some of his performances last year. Man, he's still going. It's
Not
good for him.
surprising. I mean, it all comes down to Lucho Acosta, though. For me, Acosta is that kind of player that he garners. He's not unlike Denny Bwanga in who is going to beat you ahead of time. You just have to do what you can to prevent that. And we didn't prevent it with Bwanga. He had a line breaking run past Anthony Marcanic in the LAFC game. Lucho Acosta is a different kind of player, though. He will create those line breaking runs just as much as he will be willing to take those shots. So he's great on the ball. He can pick opponents apart with those accurate long-range passings. He splits the defense with his through balls, or he can just dribble past opponents by himself. So he's dangerous, not just in what he can do with the ball, but also what he can do delivering it. That's why St. Louis has to be so careful in how they approach him, because if they commit multiple players to Lucho Acosta, he's just going to drop the ball off to one of his two strikers to score a goal in behind the back line. And if they don't pressure him enough, he's just going to take an open shot or create an open shot for himself, not unlike Salio does with the ball. He's better than Salio with the ball. That's the fact of the matter. And so that's the kind of presence that we have to respect. Now, the silver lining is you have a guy like Aaron Bupenza, another one of their strikers, who is out, and he's going to be out until around Leagues Cup with a broken jaw. This is a somewhat comical story from a couple weeks ago where Bupenza got into a bar fight one night against a local Cincinnati boxer, and he broke his jaw. And so he's out. There's going to be a couple other injury concerns that Cincy has to worry about. Corey Baird was hurt. DeAndre Yedlin was missing time. And so they're a little thin on their right wing back side. They're thin at striker, so the quality might not be there. And so that's where the defense of Cincinnati is going to be important to try and break through, because Cincinnati's not a massively goal-scoring team. St. Louis outscores them in goals for 18-16. So, Cincinnati is just very clinically effective in preventing goals, as well as just inching out what they need to get those wins.
Interesting. Good stuff, Matt. I do think this is going to be a fun conversation. I want to give us a little time. So let's go on and move over to lineup discussions. You're listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. We're presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Please do check them out. Matt, what do you have for your lineup? And we'll get this conversation started.
I don't remember when I put this lineup out. It might have been mid dealing with the Lowen news earlier today. So we'll see if this makes sense. I've got Nicholas Dewar in there. I have Kyle Hebert, Tim Parker, Jake Nerwinski on the back line, Jabulu Blom, and either Tomas Ostrak or Jose Kajima in the midfield. I think Ostrak subbing out early makes him a candidate for starting. But I do think this is an opportunity for Jabulu Blom to see time with all the minutes Durkin's been putting in. And then in the attack, I have Nukvi Thorson, AZ Jackson, Salio Pompeu, and Sam Adeniran. This was tricky because Indiana Vasilev, I believe, went 90 against LAFC. You had all the other attacking players sub out. So the question isn't necessarily who, it's where. So you have Nukvi Thorson that usually plays on the left. You have AZ who usually plays centrally, and Salio can play both sides. He's played both sides before, so it depends on, is Carnell maybe going to go with a 4-2-2-2 where he leverages Thor and Sam more up top, and he has Salio on the left, AZ on the right. He's done that before as well in that kind of a look. I guess it'll be fascinating to see where Nukvi Thorson lines up. I'm assuming he will start, just because that makes one of the more logical senses of all the players here.
I agree. So I know Indy stayed in pretty long time, if I'm not mistaken. Was Celio taken out before Indy?
Yeah, he was a 63-minute sub with that line change. They took out Klaus, Salio, and Ostrak.
So I find that super interesting. I love that you and I don't disagree hardly at all, because I thought the Celio thing was a bit of a weird call, but then when I started thinking of who was subbed out first, that makes total sense. I'm with you.
Also, if you remember, he was subbed out a few games ago at halftime, and that was not because of injury. And so I think that Carnell's been kind of building towards using Salio, needing him a bit more in this as a focal point, given all the other things that are going on.
I completely agree. So I will just throw out a different one. So I actually think what you just said is basically what I would say. Maybe Nilsson starts if we think he can go 90, but it is dangerous because you're going to want to use your subs on someone other than a center back in this one. So,
That's true.
so
That's a good
I'll
point.
just throw something different out there and say that I think Nilsson will start. And I think if not Dewar, if we're like worried about those comments from Dewar and we're thinking Nerwinski's going to start at right back, I'm pretty dead set on that happening. I think he's earned it. He's been a good soldier and he's a good player. I think maybe Watt starts at left back on this one. That was happening early in the season. It happened in preseason a lot. So I'll put Watts at left back. Well, let's just say Nilsson starts, Parker, Nerwinski. I think Blom is dead on this. I thought Durkin looked pretty tired even in the first half in this last game. He's been running hard all season. I think he's a constant stat in the live broadcast on how many, miles the players have run. He's usually in the lead for both teams. So I think Blom starts this one. Go ahead.
I was going to say Chris Durkin has played 90 minutes in the last 6 St. Louis City SC games.
Good stuff. So I said it before. I don't really care to see Blom and Durkin together unless it's just shut a game down. I wasn't too excited about that happening in the last game, even though it was short-lived before that red card. So I do want Ostrak. If Blom's going to play, I want someone like Ostrak, someone attacking. I think Kijima would be fine. And then I'll agree with everything you said about Thor, AZ, Celio, Sam.
If Blom and Durkin are in at the same time, what we saw against LAFC was a propensity to have Blom drop back and create a 3 center back look, either on the left or the right around the center backs, because he has experience as a fullback in that kind of a system. And so we've seen Bradley Carnell use him that way before. Wouldn't surprise me if in the flow of play, as things call for it, Blom drops back a little deeper, regardless of if Durkin's next to him or not. And we try to have guys like Dewar or Watts and Nerwinski push a little higher, depending on what FC Cincinnati gives us. I don't know that we're going to proactively do that, but it's a fascinating thought.
Agree. And I think a lot of subs, depending on what happens in the game, obviously we look forward to Lowen getting some time in this one. And so, we'll just see how it all plays out with lots of subs, I think, to rest the legs. One last thought, Matt, from me. Homegrown players, do you think we maybe see 1 or 2 on the bench as an opportunity to get them some time and to rest some other players?
I suppose it's a possibility we could see Caden Glover, maybe. I don't know. Tyson Pierce is no. Miggy Perez is on loan.
He would have made sense today, this weekend, right? It would have been a perfect game for him to start.
As it is, like I still think Jose Kojima is 50-50 to start this one, and I may get more into that thought. But I definitely think Kojima, Watts, they're going to see time. We're going to see time from probably Klaus, along with Ostrak, and I mean those guys who subbed out at 63. Like I think they're going to see some minutes. I don't know. This might be the game where Indy's streak ends. That would be something to watch. Indy has played played at least a minute in every single City game so far. And so that would be something to watch.
Joe Keeney's in town. Can we just
He is. Oh, we didn't even mention that. Joe Keeney was at the LAFC game at City Park as a guest, hugging players. It was just a beautiful sight to see.
It was. Really enjoyed it. Congrats to him being promoted to Serie A. And congrats to City for getting some more money on that. That's it from us. We're Fly Over Footy on the big 550 KTRS, presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Thanks for joining us today. Enjoy the game, everybody. Bye-bye. Go
City.
We went long, but maybe we'll gain a minute or something on that edit.
On the edit? There was one point where I had to stop talking about Lowen, otherwise I was going to lose it again.
I was close to cutting you off. I was like, I don't want to be mean about it, but
no, I almost got myself back into where I was this afternoon.
But fair enough. No, not on that. I thought, no, you're good.
Just time, yeah. So you want to do salary stuff, or anything else you want to talk about in the wind down?
No, I think, you ought to hit that salary stuff. I did. Mentioned that maybe, quickly, Josh Sargent isn't. Norwich City lost today in the playoffs, so they're going to be back in championship.
That stinks.
And so, he's wanted, and he said he was going to stay with Norwich if they got promoted. They didn't. So I think he might be going somewhere.
Might be on the move.
So anyway, we should mention that. We'll talk about that.
Sounds good. I'm going to go grab a drink, and we'll get this wind down started with some MLS salary roster update news. What is it? The spring salary guide that MLSPA released. That'll be awesome.
Oh, good.
And the athletic report on it. So we'll talk about some St. Louis City money spending here in a moment. Oh, great kitty. Sometimes you just have a cat who wants to listen to you do a podcast. If anybody's watching on the live stream, if you have a question about anything we've talked about so far, if you missed anything about Edu Lowen from the beginning and you have any questions about that, let us know and we'll get to that. Otherwise, any comments you want us to talk about, we will do that as well as we look through these MLS player salaries and how City stacks up.
I feel like we're forgetting something to talk about.
Well, I told you earlier, my brain is completely gone today. I am lucky I had as much as I had on FC Cincinnati because this day tore me up.
Yeah, well, we're all getting a little sick in this house. Allison's got the flu.
Oh, no.
Today all day, too, so we'll see.
Fight it.
That said, live stream, guys, ask out some questions. Maybe I'll scroll up here and maybe we can work some of these in as well. I know you guys had a lot to say.
Jerry Hayes, I'm late to the conversation. Were you allowed to ask questions of Lowen today? Yes. If you haven't seen social media, Edu Lowen's wife was diagnosed with brain cancer. And so that's why he stepped away from the team from the family medical emergency. And in addition to his rehabbing his hamstring injury, the team has given him all the time and grace on that. And we had a lot that we talked about, I think 10 minutes or so to start the pod. So look for that when you listen to it tomorrow.
What's Mo talking about with George Gansner? Cleared it all. It can't be
he was a guest on Jen Cease's show on KMOX earlier tonight.
I missed it. That's where Santi is, right?
Yes. So I'll have to see what he said. I asked a question. I told Jen to ask him about about it being different for a second yellow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in his response because, George is a ref. And so I don't know how willing refs are to talk about if that's a thing that goes through their minds or not. It's definitely prevalent in my mind as a fan. I definitely feel like I see it.
I don't know if Mo's still on, but I guess George gave a defense of the double yellow and maybe he cleared it in that way. I'm curious. I'll have to look into that too.
Agreed.
Interesting. I find it hard to believe. I'm a hard sell on that one. Ready though?
Yeah, let's do it.
Here we go. Welcome everyone to the wind down.
Zwickel tonight.
We got
it was
some
almost
special.
It was almost a brown liquor type of night.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We got some. My youngest son turned 5, and we had a party with the neighborhood, so we got some decent whiskey. So.
Nice. I can't pop open a whiskey or bourbon though, so it just ruins the sound effect. So I'm pigeonholing myself into what I can do.
Yeah, I definitely made sure I left room for me to do whatever.
Awesome.
Well, let's talk about. Let me first start with the Josh Sargent news.
Yes,
because
please do.
This is interesting, and then I think we can focus on the salary stuff. Josh Sargent's Norwich City played Leeds United today, and I think they lost their first game 2-0, and this game was a 4-0. I didn't get to watch it. I was a little too busy with work, but that meant that Josh Sargent is not going to be promoted with Norwich City. And he had said that it was his intention to stay with Norwich City if they get promoted. He was hoping that that would be the outcome. But since they weren't, there's implications that he will go somewhere else. There's interest from Premier League and Bundesliga. I'd be interested to see where he goes. I kind of would love to see him go to the French league or even Italy, maybe, but I think he would do well in the French league and it's still viewed as a pretty good league. I could even see him going to the Netherlands, maybe, and destroying there before he goes somewhere really expensive. I'm tired of him going to either. I think he's challenging himself with the wrong teams so far. So I'd like to see him go somewhere, kind of like Pepe, who didn't shine this year, but like find a team where you can thrive and be good, just like you were this last year in the championship, but make it a better league without going all the way up. I'd hate for him to go to one of the like Nottingham Forest. I'd hate to see him go to something like that, some near disaster
they've
team.
been so well so far for existing men's national team players.
Exactly. So anyway, something to monitor. I didn't give you guys the best information, but at least gets you started. You can do some Googling and find out more rumors at best, actually, at this point. But Matt, let's move on. MLS salaries were dropped. Do we expect this much information? Because I know they did a really exact drop recently, but this is like the typical salary drop. Is that right?
Yeah, they tried to release it on Wednesday, and I caught a glimpse of the website before they fully updated it and before they took it down. So I had this like non-formatted version of it. That's why I was able to tweet stuff out on Wednesday about this.
Did you screenshot it and everything? Are you that good?
I opened a tab and I just kept the tab open.
Nice.
And whatever hosting site they're using, they never changed the URL, so I was able to like copy it on my phone. So it was
well done.
It was fun to look at. And man, math on that was a little more difficult than if you were able to just like copy and highlight things or create a quick Excel thing. As it was, I figured out that St. Louis's total salary spend for 2024 is $12.05 million, which, you guessed it, is dead last in MLS. The next closest to us is CF Montreal with just above us in 12 million. Then Real Salt Lake, San Jose Earthquakes, Charlotte FC, Philadelphia Union. Starts to get a little bit higher from there. But there's this massive swell in the middle to the bottom. Like there's only a few teams that have greater than $20 million spend on their roster. It's Inter Miami at 41.6, Toronto FC at 31, Chicago Fire 25, and Nashville SC at 21. Those are the only teams who have a greater than $20 million roster spend. And Tom Bogert had a good comment on this to somebody on Twitter, which is that if you think about what the total salary spend looks at, it's basically a team's GAM and TAM allotment plus your designated players. And so when you look at these visuals that say Inter Miami has $41 million spent on their roster, okay, well, that like 70% of that is either Messi or Busquets or whoever the third DP is. It escapes me at the moment. But Toronto FC, same thing. These teams that are spending all these massive amounts, that this one graphic has been shared. This shows St. Louis City at the very bottom with 0 players earning greater than 1.683, which is max TAM. It just shows that St. Louis doesn't splash on designated players, and that's not news to anybody. It might be frustrating to see it at the bottom of this entire graph, but this isn't news. It's a reminder, if anything, and a hope that at some point in the future there will be significant spend on certain players, whether that's before or after Lutz leaves. I think that type of a player can be a difference maker if it works well properly in building your roster. Marco Royce would immediately add a significant chunk to that, you would assume, whether it's another max TAM like Berkey or not. That's the kind of player that, at the least, if you were able to acquire, it would change perceptions. But right now, all this graph does that shows St. Louis City at the bottom with 12 point whatever million dollars in roster spend. It's just reinforcing the perception. And then you look at, okay, well, if St. Louis doesn't have anybody making 1.683 or more million per year, I thought we had 3 designated players, Klaus, Lowen, and Berkey. This other thing this graph doesn't take into consideration too is our transfer fees. And it doesn't reflect uh, any kind of transfer fee spend. So you have a team like Real Salt Lake that's sitting third from the bottom, but I think I saw a number. They spent like $15 million in the transfer market here in the past window or two. Massive spends on players that are either on a DP or non-DP salary. St. Louis hasn't done that. St. Louis has looked for players out of contract or players on the winter in a winter transfer window for $500,000 in a transfer fee. And so we're able to acquire players like Roman Berkey, who is our top earner per year, for a free. And that just makes our overall transfer budget that much lower. So you're getting frugal in finding these diamonds in the rough or these players who would be backups in Europe. And there's another graph out there that looks at the what percentage of the total salary expenditure each team commits to its top earner. Messi for Miami takes up 49% of Inter Miami's roster. Lorenzo Insigne with Toronto makes up the same amount for Toronto FC. Sebastian Driussi at Austin takes up about 36.5% of their roster, their total roster spend. Roman Berkey for St. Louis takes up less than 14% of our total roster spend, and he's our highest paid player in terms of salary each year. So this is St. Louis still sticking to that designated team model, and now we're just seeing how it graphs out against other teams. St. Louis isn't last in that necessarily. You've got the Philadelphia Union, FC Dallas, Atlanta United, and Colorado Rapids, whose top earners make less of a percent, so they've spread the wealth out even more. But, Roman Berkey is the top earner at about $1.65 million per year. Klaus and Lowen are next, 1.37, 1.34 respectively. So they're only DPs because of their transfer fees. Klaus cannot be bought down like we talked about earlier because if you add up his salary plus what his transfer fee is over the life of his contract, average out the transfer fee plus his salary, then he's more than that threshold. Lowen's not, so Lowen can be bought down. But it was fascinating to me to see just, the top few percents, because that's always fascinating to see is who's making the most money for St. Louis. What kind of contracts are we giving what kind of big contracts are we giving to our players? Big in context of St. Louis City. And it's Berkey, Klaus, Lowen. Joachim Nilsson's making 1.2. Tim Parker's making 1.037. And then Thomas Ostrak's making 801,000 per year. From there, it goes down to Chris Durkin, sub 500,000. So you're looking at these 6 players who are the only players making over over $800,000 per year. And everybody else, this is why I had that comment earlier in the show about Nicholas Dewar and the contract he's on. 300,000. Yeah, depending on how you're looking at it, it could be a lot or a little. In the context of everybody here, it's pretty middle of the road, because St. Louis has been frugal with a lot of their players on their supplemental roster who don't hit the salary cap. Guys like Sam Adeniran, Anthony Marcanic, Josh Yarrow, Jose Kojima, Christian Oliveras, Miguel Perez, Tyson Pierce, and Caden Glover, those kinds of players. And then when you have players who hit the salary cap, you're jumping up to guys like Knut Thoresen, Isak Jensen, Jake Nerwinski, over 200,000. So it's that $200,000 to $300,000 range. If you're wanting to think about how much are the average City player making, it's probably that $200,000 to $400,000 range. That's a pretty sweet spot that seems to exist. The players who take up that range, $200,000 to $400,000, you're looking at Knut Thoresen, Isak Jensen, Jake Nerwinski, Nicholas Dewar, Thomas Totland, Indiana Vasilev, Rasmus Alm, Selmer Pedro, Jabulu Blom, and then it gets up to Chris Durkin. So I basically just named every single player at some point who's making a decent amount of money for St. Louis City. The 2 players that I haven't mentioned so far that are the other fascinating players, because I covered Totland and Dewar just there, are Celio Pompeu and Kyle Hebert, 2 players that just signed new contracts. Hebert signed his in the offseason.
Right.
Celio signed his right before the window closed. So these are 2 players on long-term contracts, and were making league minimum on their previous contracts, which were basically options from City 2 or initial MLS contracts 1 year from City 2. Kyle Hebert is making now $188,000. Celio Pompeu is making $198,000. These are over double the amount, over $100,000 on top of what they were making from last year. Significant increases, but you can see rewarding those players, and they're still staying in this marginal level. And so that's the moral of the story for a St. Louis City SC roster build. It's you're playing in the margins, and you're building a roster that's a designated team inside of these margins of the hundreds of thousands of dollars, not the multi-million.
I like it. Lutz said he wanted a designated team, and now we see the numbers are pairing that out as best as MLS will allow in its current ecosystem. And I think the only thing that you haven't covered, because I think you covered it thoroughly, is that you know if you're only looking at numbers of salary numbers, and you're like, well, St. Louis isn't spending, and that's the end of the story for you, you're just not taking into consideration that Lutz has done a really good job bringing guys in for good salaries, good prices,
Yep.
right? I mean, you cannot ignore that Berkey came in for the price that he did. That's just like good business for Lutz. And I think Berkey's happy with his situation too, which is just like, it just feels like an impossibility that happened. And some days I have to pinch myself and remember that we have Roman Berkey back there doing the job that he's doing on the level that he is, making the salary that he's doing that allows us to spend in other ways. And even, if Royce comes in, it's only because of that deal. If Royce doesn't come in, or if they were like
Mhm.
honestly looking at Firmino back in the day, and he had come in again, it's because of the deals that Lutz was able to get. So the numbers aren't the whole story. Matt, I'm glad you really clarified that there's a massive difference between salary and then including transfer fees. The RSL example is a perfect one, obviously. So I think that covers it pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, and there's one other aspect that I want to look at, and now we're in our second year. It's year over year spending, because there's the other narrative in addition to just wanting to spend more is, how is St. Louis City trending? One of the underlying things that has just existed in why we've been frugal isn't that Carolyn Kindle doesn't want to spend money. It's that she's already spent a ton of money. They're still recouping these costs from the investment they made into the facility, the district, the stadium, the training grounds, all of these things that were privately financed. And so they have all of their irons in those fires. And we've talked in the past about a desire from Lutz and probably a desire from Carolyn Kindle to more or less have the sporting side be self-sufficient, in the sense that if you're signing a designated player or you're going to sign a big high dollar player, you need to have money coming in from outgoing transfers. And we started to see that with Nico Gioacchini. And so we didn't immediately go out and reinvest that amount of money that we could convert into GAM or otherwise into a new player. But just because we didn't do it in the couple of days or couple of weeks, couple of months, yeah, I think there's 2 months, when we sold Gioacchini, doesn't mean we're not going to do that this summer. And so looking at reinvesting what we're selling in players is going to be a key component of how this roster is going to continue to grow. No doubt about that in my mind. We may get cash splashed here and there over the years, but the more we grow and develop and sell, the more we're going to be able to bring in elsewhere. That's going to be a key component that we have to consider when it comes to player sales and these rumors of outgoing players. But even if we don't do that, still seeing year over year growth in our wage bill is a positive step. St. Louis is one of 17 teams that has had a positive wage bill growth since last year. They are 13th in the quantity of that growth, just under, I think, just over 7% of how their wage bill was last year. So you're looking at new signings like Dewar and Totland, in addition to some of the players who left, like John Bell, Johnny Nelson, those kinds of players. But you're also, and bringing on Chris Durkin with his salary that was significantly higher than either Lucas Bartlett or Jared Stroud. But you're also looking at increases in some player salaries. You've had a few of these players who had their salaries increased marginally, 5 to 10% year over year. And so, in addition to just that inherent growth in the MLSPA salaries, bringing on new players like Totland and Dewar was a fantastic step in seeing this increased investment marginally that makes the roster better and deeper year over year. And so that plays into the salary growth. Is the product on the field is better. I think everybody at this point in time really feels like this product on the field for this team is better than it was last year holistically overall. We have more positive things to say about how this team fights and can last in matches. They're not swinging for the fences and then giving up matches every other game type of a thing. And so that's the last thing I think I want to say on it, is just this year over year concept in continuing to spend more and more, a little bit more marginally. And then as we sell our players, as we have more money to reinvest in our player pool from outgoing transfers, you're going to see spikes here and there, whether it's a Cedric Tukert spike or Marco Royce spike or somebody else, one of those other 5 strikers that was rumored, but we don't know who they are yet. We're going to see some kind of spike, and I have no doubt. I think Tuchert's contract at Hanover was around 800,000 euros, maybe. I think that's the kind of spike that we could see that would make a massive difference, because if you remember those 6 players I mentioned earlier, an $800,000 player immediately steps into the top 6 earners on the St. Louis City roster.
Yeah, I think the thing that spoke to me most there that you said is that, that this team does operate differently. And so they're able to punch above their weight based on the way they play. And we see that weekly, right? And I do think that's a good point. I think it's intentional. I think it's going to be there probably forever to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that, I think Cedric Tukert, I'm going to say like his signing is going to bring us back up to water level. You know what I mean? Like back up to,
yeah.
With losing Joe Aquini, I don't think we've brought in a talent level to replace that loss. And so I think Tukert will bring us right back to like where we were when we had Joe Aquini as far as depth. Not that, looking at the bench versus Chicago versus St. Louis's bench last week. I mean, ours was much, much better, right? We felt much better than them, but still, as far as the amount of money that everyone's spending in MLS with the recent raise it's not official, but the raise that's coming in the amount of money you can spend, Tuchert's going to be like back to, barely treading water in MLS, in my opinion. And so, I'll just say that if this is going to keep going, I agree with you, Matt. I love that Joe Aquini shout. If we start selling guys off and we can spend that money and just re-inject it without having to pull money like cash from the owners, that's going to help a lot. And I do think we'll see that every year. And, the raise this year isn't a disappointing thing. I think that's definitely a good thing. But I think something that I'm starting to feel like we're behind on that I really hope we start seeing in the next year more is just using the academy. It was supposed to be the way that we get around. Like, we haven't sold any academy kids. I think we thought, I can't remember his name. The kid that we bought that was supposed to go to Bayer Leverkusen.
Aaron Hurd.
Thank you. I think that was like the kind of move that we thought, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring in players that are wanted around the world. We're going to be able to sell them off or use them and then sell them off. So that's something that I thought was going to happen, and it's not even close right now. The fact that we haven't seen an academy kid play first team minutes this season, I think is pretty disappointing to me, because it has been touted as something that is going to be a focus for the team. And whether that's like the 3-year timeline, the 4-year timeline because of COVID, we're not there yet. So patience for sure, but I'm starting to feel it. I'm starting to worry that it isn't something that is going as well as we hoped it would go.
Yeah, the academy is a good call out in this. It's kind of a pivot from, but before I touch on that, the last thing I was going to touch on that you had from Nico Gioacchini is that example. If you haven't replaced him yet, that's a really good reminder that we haven't replaced Nico Gioacchini yet. But the Cedric Tukert example, the one example that we have on, and if we assume he'd stay consistent around 800,000, that's double Gioacchini's salary from when we acquired him. So, that's still, I would view that as an increase in what you would expect from that player. You buy a player for a certain salary and you think he's worth that salary. And now you have a roster where you can start to make comparisons to certain people in certain roles. And so that's, I would say that's an increase in your investment. When you're selling a player, you acquire another one. You want that acquisition to be better, or to at least project better. And so I think Tuchert would probably fit that bill. And the academy is a really interesting look, because the more homegrowns we sign, the more they don't affect our overall salary cap related roster spend, because anyone in the supplemental roster, that's roster slots 21 through 30, where homegrowns are filled, they don't affect your salary cap. They don't touch the numbers that we're looking at earlier, the 12.05 million. And so you have a team like Inter Miami that I think may have an average age less than St. Louis City, because they have like 7, 8, 9 homegrown, something crazy like that. And that's where I agree with you. I would love to see St. Louis City get to that point where they have players that we can see not just progress, but we can see like flashpoints in each one of their careers. Carson Locker is probably the most recent one that you would expect to eventually take that next step, get more time with City 2 and then eventually a City contract based on the fact that he's the one player that's been asked to step up and spend time in City camp before the season and with City 2 in training and all of these different things. Now, was it just an injury replacement? Is that why he was picked? Because he was the best midfielder that we had, and had a need to fill Eddie Leuven's spot at midfield because Michael Wenzel could fill Joachim Nilsson's at center back? Maybe, could be.
Mhm.
So you don't know exactly. I'm most curious right now about Caden Glover and where
Yeah.
the club sees his development and growth because he's still a teenager, but he's going into his second year under contract with St. Louis City. And so, when are they going to start pulling the trigger, feeling comfortable getting him MLS minutes? He's already taken up a roster spot. So, if you're not going to use, like Tyson Pierce is unavailable for the season. I think I don't think they announced it, but he's our season long loan to City 2. That's what they
Mm.
meant in the roster profile about that unavailable. And so you have Caden Glover, but who else is in the pipeline? You have a lot of talent at the UPSL level. You have Brendan McSorley. I don't know if you would call him a homegrown. He's a super draft pick. So those are kind of the next guys I would look to. That if you can have significant time being put on the field by these players, then it really takes some pressure off of the need to spend big. It's all about production. If you can produce with the roster that we have right now, which we did last year, that's why a lot of the conversations didn't happen because winning solves everything. If you win, nobody cares if you're the lowest spend team until you don't win. And that's what we saw last year. If we continue to get production, or if we start getting production rather out of our homegrowns, then all this conversation about spending more on DPs or needing to bring in more players, get more production, all of it becomes moot. And you have the added benefit of the long-term prospects of then eventually selling those homegrowns, kickstarting that cycle that I just mentioned a few minutes ago of selling a player, being able to reinvest in a better caliber player.
Yeah, and just looking at some of the City 2 guys, Glover hasn't started since March 31st. Klein looks like Klein, I just kind of was starting to hang my hat on him because of how he did last year.
Yeah.
But he's got 2 assists, looks like a goal. I don't know if that's right or not. But Miki, why am I blanking on his name? Joyner, is the leading scorer for City 2. So he's 17. He's not a homegrown player, is he?
He
He's
will
not
be.
signed.
He will be. He's not a homegrown right now, but if he were to
Yeah.
sign, he would be. He came over from Gallagher. He was
Okay.
that player they signed in the fall of, I want to say, 2022.
Oh yeah. So, but he's the leading scorer for City 2 right now. So there's some hope there.
Mhm.
And plans change. It's fine. And it may just be I can't be all negative because look at Miguel Perez. He's going to go on this loan this year, and I imagine he comes back and maybe even stays next year and puts in a lot of minutes. We're going to be pretty happy with that if that happens, and maybe that jump starts someone else is ready to move up, and maybe that jump starts the train of consistent, pipeline of players coming up, one a year, one every 2 years kind of thing. And by the time we hit year 5 or 6, we've got 3 or 4 guys playing consistent minutes throughout the season that are homegrown signings. That would be massive. And,
Yeah.
We are nowhere near being past the point of that being possible. We're not even close. But like I said, it is something that's a little worried. I thought we'd be a little bit further along at this point. But maybe
Agreed.
that's because everything else has been so successful. I'm expecting the same from our academy system.
I mean, the
Who
the
knows?
the system themselves, like they're high performers in their competitions, UPSL, U17s. They're doing fantastic. And you're seeing the guys who are at UPSL right now and who have gotten amateur contracts with City 2 this year, who were those original academy players. And so it's Luce's first class, so to speak,
Mhm.
that has reached that level. And so you can see that a lot of them, they might not be the 15, 16, 17-year-old homegrown signings, the phenoms or the really just headline grabbing players. But you could see that if they don't go to college, maybe some of these guys from the UPSL side find their
Yeah.
way over to City, or they produce enough where we sign a player to, I don't know, 19, 20-year-old player to a homegrown deal. And we start to, they have this competition level that's different from the UPSL side or from City 2 that they've played at. And so what I really want to see is I want to see the progression of signing a player who's signed with City 2 to a homegrown deal. because that will signify you have to go through our academy to be a homegrown player. That'll signify that the pipeline is complete, so to speak. I don't know if you count Tyson Pierce as that type of player. I don't think he played much with City 2, but I really want to see that kind of consistency because it really shows the trust in each level of the system. And it will also prove to other players that if you go through the academy, maybe UPSL or whatever that ends up being in the future, over to City 2, that you can find a pro contract with the MLS side through that entire pipeline. And it would really, it would prove it. And I think that's what I want to see more of.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought up UPSL because I was going to mention that too as like a positive sign that it's translating on that, on that level. And maybe it won't be too much of a jump to start figuring out how to translate it to City 2 and further on. So feel good about that, Matt?
Yeah, there's one question. Cordis AJ in our live stream chat, talking about the match this weekend. So might as well finish with the match against FC Cincinnati. I'm afraid of the service on set pieces and corners if Indy doesn't start. Without Lowen available, his service has been so much more dangerous than everyone else. No lies detected there.
Yeah.
AZ next in line or Salio? I say both. And the reason both, because one's left-footed, one's right-footed. I think depending on where the ball is, what side. Salio's left-footed, AZ's right-footed, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think Celio's left-footed. He's just really good with it.
You sure?
No, but I would bet on it.
All right, Phil and I.
That'd be a fun poll, actually.
Put it on the board. We need a bet board.
I was gonna say that on FIFA, on EA FC, Celio's right-footed, but also Thorison's left-footed on EA 24, and I know that's not true. So.
Ooh, yeah, no, that's not true.
So we can't go by FIFA.
We can't. And Transfermarkt does not have his foot listing, which is where I usually go to confirm my theories / claims. All right. What foot is Salio's dominant foot? That's a bet now that Phil and I have. Yeah. But I do say either of those.
What should we put on it? That would be we should put something fun on this bet.
Well, to be determined. I'm not coming up with a bet off the cuff.
One of us has to shave our mustache. What do you think?
Last time I came up with a bet off the cuff, I ended up with this mustache.
Okay, there you go.
And that was against the Chicago Fire. So we will see.
Well, that'll be a fun one.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for this FC Cincinnati match because it still feels like a match where St. Louis is going to just throw whatever they need to, and they're not going to be afraid to go for it in this match.
Yeah.
I don't think we gave our scoreline predictions originally, so we should probably get that in. I was thinking it would be a 1-1 game. I think it's going to be low scoring. FC Cincinnati, like I said, they've got a consistency in scoring goals, but they don't score like buckets of goals. And St. Louis is kind of the same. Well, St. Louis is kind of the opposite, actually. St. Louis scores buckets of goals every few games, but then they also have these games where they score nothing. So it very well could be 1-0. I don't know what I'm actually going to submit for the Creator Challenge thing for Chris Gebhardt because I've been I need to listen to my head more than listen to my heart and say what's possible. And I need to start getting into my head, even if it's only with that as what's likely. And I mean, to be quite honest, man, what's likely is a 1-0 loss or even a 2-0 loss.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually.
Is that your prediction? A 2-0 loss?
I'm going to say 1-0. Okay. I think you're right about the defense. I think that was a good point. So I switched it in my head in that moment from 2-0 to 1-0.
Just a hard place to play. It's just a hard place to play.
Do you want to give an official 1-0 or 2-0? What do you think?
I will go with a 2-0 loss for St. Louis on this one as my official score prediction. Now, because I like that sweet karma on game day, I don't know if I'm going to include that on my game day prediction. But I might. You never know. It's maybe that'll be the bulletin board material. Maybe some of the players will check social media and say, "How dare Matt Baker pick us to lose? He's never done that before. Now he picks now." The nerve of that
Team
guy.
Hungry is getting angry at Matt Baker,
right? No, but
isn't that what we called it? The San Jose team, didn't we call them like the Team Hungry?
Oh yeah. Last year, yes.
Making sure I'm not off on that.
I think it was a 2-1 win. So if we pull it out, I mean, I will be so impressed because that's how impressive this FC Cincinnati team is. And I'll also be, I don't like Cincinnati. We didn't talk at all about the history between St. Louis and Cincinnati. If Stu was on, he would definitely let you know about the old MLS to SDL and MLS to Cincy days that kind of kickstarted this, at least internet version of this rivalry.
Mm.
On top of the fact that Cincy saying they crushed the USL without actually winning a USL title, and just the mean-natured, mean-spirited attacks on us when the vote didn't go our way for MLS to SDL. Their terrible 3 in a row wooden spoons that they had, only able to win with a St. Louis and as a head coach. I mean, there's so many stories and narratives that I'm now regretting not getting into earlier. But hopefully, if you've made it this far on the podcast and stuck with us on the video, you're getting some of these fun stories, because it really is a heck of a ride between St. Louis and Cincinnati.
Yeah, if you dig into our history, I would say that's Cincinnati's way more of a rival naturally, historically, than Chicago Fire, for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, especially because, we have a lot of history in the USL, and that has, we beat FC Cincinnati. It was the Sam Fink, miracle goal. Those kinds of things matter to fans of soccer in St. Louis. Like, we remember those. We carry those memories forward, even if the clubs can't officially acknowledge any kind of official matchups type of a thing. Chris Gebhardt in the chat also asks, not that it's a thing players care about, but I wonder if there's any payback for last year's result. It could be something players have on their mind. That tornado match, the 5-1 result, I think it was, that St. Louis had at home over FC Cincinnati. So there could be a level of revenge that they want. Also, side note, Chris, I'm glad you're with us here tonight. Glad you're doing better. Scary thing last week, and we are so glad you're okay and so glad you're with us.
Amazing you're joining us tonight. Even it feels wonderful. So
it does. It feels like a true night of talking soccer right now.
All right, I think that's it from us, guys. Thanks for joining us on the wind down and listening to the podcast every week. If you do, we really appreciate it. I mean, Matt, he's the king of putting out content. My goodness, are we up to 3 shows a week now, or is it more?
No,
with that AJ interview, I think we got 4, right?
We did. Yeah, this week we had 4 with AJ Cochran you had, and I had the midweek thing with the extra LAFC preview. I don't know how we're doing it, but we're doing it.
You are, sir. You are.
It's fun. If I didn't like it so much, I wouldn't be able to do it. But every time I say, gosh, I just want to go watch TV, or I just want to go play EAFC or something like that, I'm like, nah, I'd kick myself later if I didn't do this. And I'm in the middle of it and thinking, I just love looking at these.
That's awesome. Lucky to have you, buddy. Again, that's it from us. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you guys very soon. In a matter of days, you'll get another show from Matt. Bye, everybody.
Bye.